welcome to Sammy C. Press. Today we're diving back into something more than Shakespeare, Poetry Workbook. We're going to be discussing Paul Laurence Dunbar. Here are some quick facts. He was born in 1872 and he died in 1906. He was born in Dayton, Ohio. He was a poet, novelist, and short story writer. He went to high school with the Wright brothers. Dunbar's parents had been enslaved in Kentucky before the American Civil War. His mother was a former slave who was emancipated. His father was a slave that escaped and served in the 55th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment and the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry Regiment during the Civil War. Sadly, his father Joshua died in 1885 when Paul was only 13 years old. When Paul was 6 years old, he wrote his first poem. At 9, he gave his first public recital. Paul's mother helped him in his schooling. She learned to read for that very reason. Paul had his first poem published in the Dayton newspaper when he was 16. Dunbar was the only African American student during his years at Central High School in Dayton. He was elected as president of the School Literacy Society. Paul was also a member of the debate team as well as the editor of the school newspaper. His firmly established reputation was not only recognized in America but also internationally. He was one of the first African American writers to do this. He wrote more than strictly poetry. Paul also wrote novels, short stories, and even lyrics for the musical comedy In Dahomey in 1903. This was the first all African American musical production on Broadway in New York. Paul wrote formal poetry as well as dialect poetry. Formal poetry is poetry that overtly uses the effects of meter, rhyme, and form, especially fixed forms like sonnets. Dialect poetry is poetry that attempts to reproduce the accents, quirks, and speech patterns of people who aren't speaking standardized English. Paul became the first African American poet to earn national distinction and acceptance. During his lifetime, Paul was not given many awards. He did receive a ceremonial sword presented to him by President Teddy Roosevelt. But since his death, numerous schools and other places have been named in his honor. Sadly, at the young age of 33, Paul died from tuberculosis, which had no cure. Although young, he did not pass away without being heard or helping others to have a voice for the future. Maybe he too will inspire you as well. A poem that many are familiar with by Dunbar is We Wear the Mask. This is a fairly regular iambic tetrameter. Each line contains 8 syllables and iambic, which means unstressed, stressed, da-dum. The only exception is in lines 9 and 15. This poem has 3 stanzas. The first stanza has 5 lines, the second has 4, and the third has 5. This type of poem is called a rondeau. This is a type of poem that varies between 10 and 15 lines in length and is organized into 3 stanzas. Iambic tetrameter is generally the meter of a rondeau. It's easier to spot because it only has a certain rhyme scheme, that of AABBA, AABC, and then the last stanza AABBAC. We know the mask to be a metaphor in this poem for a specific experience of being black in America at the end of the 19th century. In the poem, the speaker tells us about what it's like to be part of an oppressed group. This group must constantly mask or hide their true feelings from the world, putting on a happy face no matter what it is they're experiencing inside. After the American Civil War, this was supposed to be a time when things became better for African Americans. Sadly, that was far from reality. There was still intense hardship and racism. The poem itself does not mention race specifically. Because of this, many have read the poem to fit the way they themselves are experiencing life. Many today still have to put on a brave face in order to survive injustice, abuse, and much more. Many today would cry out with Dunbar saying, "We wear the mask." We hope you've enjoyed this brief discussion of Paul Laurence Dunbar. Feel free to check out more of his poems as well as the man himself. Until next time.